I have come to set a man against his father. So, happy Father's Day for all who celebrate. I don't know how your family is, but that actually can ring true in a lot of cases, right? This reading that we have from the Gospel of Matthew today is difficult, to put it mildly. Jesus says some hard things. He insinuates that the disciples will be persecuted because he is going to be persecuted. He uses some pretty stark language here to imply that there will be a day of judgment where some will be counted worthy and others will be punished. And he upends all the things that we think we know about the Jesus story by saying that he has come to tear families apart along with the very fabric of society. So it's important to remember that whenever we read the New Testament, really any book in the Bible, but especially the New Testament, we have to look at it through at least 3 different lenses. We need to consider the setting of the story itself. We would call this the narrative lens. What is happening in and around Jesus during the story? Who is Jesus talking to and why? We also have to consider the context in which the story is being written down or shared. This you can call the historical lens, because every gospel was written from within a particular community that was struggling with particular things. Every gospel writer has a particular audience. And both of those lenses are really informative and all well and good, but if we don't ask ourselves what these stories are telling us today, what is the good news for us here in this time and this place, then what is the point in reading them at all? So that would be the contemporary lens. Now there's a real danger here in getting these lenses confused or trying to apply one to the other. If you read the gospel as if you are part of the story and Jesus is speaking those words directly to you, or if you read the story as if it was being written to you, there's a danger here because you can take the perspectives that were true at the time and you can apply those to what you know of the story of Jesus, and that can be used to justify all kinds of harm to all kinds of people. In some ways, we call this proof texting. So especially when there is a difficult story like today, we have to look through all 3 lenses. So let's start with the context in which today's story is written, so the narrative lens. In this story, just 1 chapter ago in the narrative, Jesus first makes a reference to his impending death. So we know at this time that Jesus is speaking that he knows where all this is going, but we don't know whether his followers do or not. In fact, later in the story, we know that when he actually talks about his death, the apostles kind of freak out. So they probably don't know where all this is heading. A few verses after Jesus references his impending death, he is out there casting out demons, and the religious authorities say, by the ruler of the demons, he is casting out demons. So it is in this context that Jesus says, if they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, the ruler of the demons, how much more will they malign his household? Jesus is trying to prepare his followers, the people actually walking town to town with him, for what is to come. And what is to come, at least in the near term during their life, is not the glorious triumph of the nation of Israel and the restoration of the house of David that they believe the Messianic age would bring in. What is to come for Jesus, we know, is humiliation, beating, a crucifixion, and what is to come for those followers is a lot of the same. So when he says he is not here to bring peace but the sword, he is telling that to a group of people who he knows will not experience peace in their lifetimes. And when he says that people need to be ready to take up their cross and follow him, he is saying it to a group of Jews living in the Roman Empire that know that crucifixion is only a form of capital punishment reserved by the Romans for non-Romans, for people that they considered rebels against the state. So the good news in all of that is that even though he's telling his followers how hard it's going to be, He says that he will not leave them even when he's gone, that God will not leave them even when they feel utterly abandoned. So let's look at the context of when and where the story was written down. The Matthean community, we'll call it the historical lens. The writer of Matthew was writing 60 to 70 years after Jesus walked the earth. So a generation, to a community of Jewish Christians, which is important because at this time there were not Jews and there were Christians. There were Jews, there were Jewish Christians, there were Gentile Christians, and there were Gentiles. People didn't know where they belonged. And Matthew is writing in a time to a Jewish Christian community. And to be considered Jewish was to take on an entire identity. It was quite literally your tribe, your family, your way of protection, your way of being. But the Jewish Christians, who still considered themselves Jewish, had also believed that Jesus was the Messiah, that the Messianic age was still there. So we have actual stories of families being torn apart by this. We have actual stories of fathers stoning their children to death for professing Jesus as the Messiah, because it was a big deal. These people were not just scared that you wouldn't believe like them. For the Jews, to not be right by God was to bring destruction down on your entire community. They believed the Babylonian exile happened because they didn't follow the law well enough. So when Jesus says that he has come to create all sorts of family division, the gospel writer loosely quotes Micah, the prophet Micah, a text that the first readers of the Gospel of Matthew would have known intimately. This both ties Jesus intimately and thoroughly to the Jewish tradition, quoting the prophet Micah, but also allows those first hearers to fill in the rest of the quote. We don't hear that because we don't know. Maybe some of you do. I don't know the prophet Micah in and out. The rest of the quote, after the whole fathers and sons and mothers and daughters division thing, is, "But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me." That's what the readers of Matthew would have naturally automatically filled in, and that is good news. But all of that, the painful persecution, the family division, the risking of capital punishment, that is not our reality. For us, being a follower of Jesus only brings discomfort at worst, and really only if we're doing it right. So we are called to our version of discipleship today, speaking up against injustices and prejudices, even when they are happening in our own communities or in our own families. Using our budgets as moral documents, supporting people and places that we really believe are doing good work, doing kingdom work, even when it doesn't really make financial sense to do so. Leaving behind the safe peace of complicity when the sword of prophetic dissent is needed to change the status quo. But there's good news for us in that mission too, because discomfort comes with following Jesus, sure, but it is not the goal. Picking up our crosses does not mean we should strive to suffer as Jesus suffered. Losing our lives for the sake of the gospel does not mean refusing to care for ourselves or our relationships or leaving our family behind. The good news here is the same news Jesus gave to the people who were about to face far worse than we will ever face. That we are known, that we are held, and that even when our families or our friends or our coworkers or our communities can't understand where we're coming from as Christians, we are not alone. We have a community of disciples that Jesus started, that we continue. We have each other trying our best to get it right. And that is what makes all this bearable. That is what makes it all possible, to leave the peace of complicity in a system that harms people for something harder and truer, but better. There is so much that we can learn about the story of Jesus by looking through different lenses. But really, when you get down to it, the point of the story remains the same. God so loved the world, the cosmos. God so loves us that our very existence is worth showing up for. It's worth the discomfort. It's worth the sword. Amen.